Hey everyone, my name is Kay, and here on NutriTherapy, I talk about health and wellness, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, mostly the bad and the ugly, but today's going to be a fun video. We're actually going to be talking about gluten and how it became so controversial. 2012 was the year of the gluten-free diet, as talk show hosts, celebrities, and some dietitians began attributing better skin, weight loss, and a greater sense of physical well-being from eliminating gluten from their diets. Supermarkets all over the country began loading their shelves with gluten-free products. But are these claims actually true? In its most basic definition, gluten refers to a class of proteins that can be found in grains like wheat, rye, barley, and oats. Derived from the Latin word for glue, gluten proteins, when combined with water, produce a sticky consistency. These gluten proteins have a high content of the amino acids proline and glutamine. Gluten provides dough flexibility and allows the bread to rise when cooked, giving it a chewy texture. Celiac disease is characterized by chronic intestinal inflammation, destruction of the intestinal villi, and results to inadequate nutrient absorption. For those who have celiac disease, the gut's stomach enzymes are unable to break down the gluten proteins proline and glutamine. The large fragments of the gluten proteins trigger an autoimmune reaction that harms the intestinal mucosa. Those who have celiac disease are usually advised by their doctors to avoid gluten in order to successfully manage the illness. Approximately 1% of the U.S. population is diagnosed with celiac disease, and another 6 to 7% are estimated to have gluten sensitivity. In order to understand how we got here, it's important to know the history. We're going to walk through a brief timeline starting with the 1940s. In the 1940s, Dutch pediatrician William Dyke noticed a dramatic improvement in celiac disease symptoms among Dutch children, coinciding with the time of the bread shortage during World War II. He subsequently found that these symptoms returned once bread was reintroduced into the children's diet after the war ended. Researchers then discovered that the elimination of wheat, barley, rye, and to a lesser degree oats caused the malabsorption syndrome to go away. Dr. William Dyke published an article in 1941 detailing his clinical observations and the effect of a wheat-free diet on his patients. Subsequently, the medical community began associating gluten with the symptoms of celiac disease. Simultaneously, advancements were made in the development of a biopsy procedure to diagnose celiac disease. In the 1970s, scientists discovered the first signs that celiac disease may be an autoimmune disorder as opposed to an allergic one. The pathogenesis, or how the disease develops at the cellular level, was first described in scientific literature. By the mid to late 1970s, numerous studies on the pathogenesis of the disease had been published, linking celiac disease with immunological disorders. The first description of non-celiac gluten sensitivity was published in the journal Gastroenterology in 1980. The article described patients whose celiac-like symptoms disappeared while they adhered to a gluten-free diet. The biopsies revealed no evidence of celiac disease. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity is recognized as a condition with the same symptoms as celiac disease but without the immune system damaging the intestines. However, more research was still desperately needed in this area. After working with celiac patients in Europe, Alessio Fasano, director of the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment at Massachusetts General Hospital, moved to the United States in 1993. He was very surprised when doctors and other healthcare professionals informed him that celiac disease was virtually non existent in the United States. He then began to investigate why celiac disease was so uncommon in the United States and discovered the exact opposite. It turned out that celiac disease was just as prevalent in the US as it was in Europe, according to a paper that Fasano authored and published in 1996. Fasano's data would alter the scientific community's perception of gluten in the United States. According to another significant study conducted by Dr. Vazano in the US, there were approximately 1% of Americans with celiac disease, which is 10 times more common than previously believed. Vazano's research was published in 2003. After Fasano brought attention to celiac disease in the U.S., more research about gluten sensitivity in Americans appeared, some of which suggested that a subgroup of individuals with different medical conditions would benefit from a gluten-free diet. Some research investigated the possibility of a link between gluten and schizophrenia, while others hypothesized a connection between gluten and autism. As scientists explored curious connections between gluten-free diets and various disorders, celebrities started to weigh in as well. In 2012, singer and actress Miley Cyrus tweeted that she had lost weight due to a gluten-free and lactose-free diet since she had gluten and lactose allergies, she said in the tweet. By 2013, according to research from Mintel, the gluten-free food and beverage market reached a value of $10.5 billion. The FDA released guidelines for labeling gluten-free food products the same year, and restaurants started labeling menus, and grocery stores started creating special gluten-free sections. Now, going back to the Miley Cyrus tweet, that really shifted the dynamics in vilifying gluten. Since then, a number of celebrities such as Kourtney Kardashian, Victoria Beckham, and others have made claims that they are on a gluten-free diet. According to the Food Marketing Institute, celebrity endorsements and weight loss programs are attributed to the increase in gluten-free products and sales. Influencers and celebrities have promoted the gluten-free diet and given it an unfounded health halo for those who don't have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. According to a Consumer Reports survey, 63% of Americans believed a gluten-free diet was healthier than a diet with gluten. I would make the argument that one of the contributing factors to this belief that a gluten-free diet is healthier is because of packaging. These days, it's not unusual to find gluten-free written alongside natural or organic on a package. Although organic foods have their benefits, this form of labeling does not always suggest a more nutrient-dense product. However, consumers do perceive natural and organic foods as being more nutritious than other foods, which would make it easy to assume that gluten-free food is healthier when gluten-free labeling appears alongside organic or natural labels. Also, there have been anecdotes of people claiming to have lost weight by avoiding gluten. However, there has not been research to substantiate these claims. Generally speaking, gluten-free foods aren't inherently healthier than foods containing gluten. Unless you have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, there's very little evidence to support the claims that gluten has a negative effect on your health. Compared to foods that contain gluten, many gluten-free items tend to have higher calories. According to one study, a gluten-free diet is linked to an increase in obesity due to the substitute of potato and cornstarch and the high content of saturated fat in processed gluten-free products. Now, I'd be remiss to mention that there is a segment of the population that believes gluten is toxic for everyone, and I just wanted to share a quick clip of what Dr. Fasano had to say about that.
One of the most fearful and fight to be settled debates and concerning nutrition is the question is if gluten is toxic for everybody. So I would like to really briefly review the facts and fantasies so we can have a straight answer here. Fact number one, is it true that gluten cannot be digested by anybody? The answer is yes, it is true. Gluten is a complex of proteins that needs to be digested in order for us to make use of. And contrary to many other proteins come from foods, we are now capable to completely dismantle gluten in a single forming blocks that are called amino acids. So what is left after the digestion of gluten are fragments, what we call technically peptides, that communicate with us and do something that eventually could have some consequences. Second question, it is true that gluten increased gut permeability, otherwise said, leaky gut in everybody? The answer is yes, that's true. Some of these undigested fragments can communicate with our guts and make them leakier so that this fragment can sneak in our body and passing from the intestinal lumen in our circulation. Question number three, because the first two are true facts, It is true then that we can always pay consequences by eating gluten because we cannot digest completely and will increase gut permeability, and therefore we will be made sick if we do not avoid gluten from our diet. The answer is no, that's false. While it's true that everybody will have problem to completely digest gluten and these fragments that are undigested can come through, it is also true that this is the consequence of mechanisms that were in place to defend us against possible enemies. And indeed, gluten is managed by our surveillance system as a fragment of a microorganism, and we unleash the same kind of response when we are eventually exposed to these microorganisms. Once gluten fragments make the journey and come in our body, the destiny of what happened, it really depends who we are genetically speaking. The vast majority of us are genetically predisposed to manage this correctly, so much so that we will not have consequences, and therefore clinically we will not have any problems in eating gluten. A minority of us will, on the other hand, be genetically predisposed to have some clinical consequences. Which one? It depends what kind of genetic predisposition we're talking about. 1% of the general population is genetically predisposed to respond to this chain of events by mounting an autoimmune response that translates in the damage of the intestine and the clinical consequences typical of celiac disease. Another small percentage, between 0.3 and 0.5%, will eventually mount an allergic response to gluten, as we do for any other foodstuff, if we're genetically predisposed, with clinical consequences of developing with allergy. And finally, a third group of individuals, and a percentage we don't know exactly yet, will have yet another form of immune response that translates in non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or short gluten sensitivity, with clinical consequences. Bottom line, it is not true that everybody needs to go gluten-free to stay healthy, but it's true that there is a subgroup of individuals that will be, because of their genetic predisposition, pay consequences if they eat gluten, and therefore they need to avoid gluten from their diet.
This brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.